Good evening, folks. Thank you for coming to our sixth in the interview series. Tonight, we're talking with Steve Stroiman. So a little sketch about Steve. Initially, Steve was born in Milwaukee. He's lived in Philadelphia for 53 years and in Northwest Philadelphia for 46 of those years. Steve is a rabbi, and he has a doctorate in educational psychology. He has been a member of NVN since its inception, as founders Peter and Ann were neighbors. So I'd like to welcome Steve and listen to his reflections on his vocational life.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome, Susan. So you are going to sit facing me?
I am.
We have a timer here, and it clamps onto my foot and squeezes it if I go over.
There you are.
All right. So I'm not looking at myself so much. I'm looking at Susan. Susan, you mentioned my background, that I am a rabbi. I have a doctorate in educational psychology. And why I am repeating that is because both of those have played very, very strongly in my work life. The rabbinical ordination was the what, the rabbinical studies, the Jewish studies. That was the what in my work that I did. I figured that going to a rabbinical school, even though I didn't want to be a synagogue rabbi, was the best place where I can get a really well-rounded, full Jewish education in the classics, in Bible and Talmud and so forth. And so that was the what, that was the content. And the educational psychology part was the how-to and how to apply. In educational psychology, I focused on group dynamics, on organizational development and small group processes. And so having the content and having the how-to really has helped me. And I do want to give a big shout out to Elliot, because Elliot was on my dissertation committee at Temple. So thank you, Elliot, for getting me to this point. I owe you a lunch. No, we're past that, Elliot. Anyway, so why I bring those two up is because I've heard so many people say that their undergrad, their graduate work really didn't apply much to their life work. But I'm very fortunate because they played very heavily into my life work. And I've had really three parallel careers throughout my adult life, and I will explain them as I go along. The first was a more traditional one where I got paid for doing that work.
It's nice.
Okay. I taught at Akiba Hebrew Academy for 34 years. Akiba, which has another name these days, Barak Hebrew Academy. But I taught when it was Akiba. It's a co-ed Jewish day school. It's a college prep school, grades 6 through 12. And it attracted kids from a 45-mile radius. So we got kids from all over who wanted a very challenging, both general track and a Jewish studies track. And I teaching in the Jewish studies track, that's where I was. And I had always been fascinated by how people learn and being challenged with teenagers. And I chose that group because of their spontaneity, their creativity, and the fact that I could be serious and goofy at the same time. It was a challenge to learn how they learned, how they best learned. And I found that by creating vivid mental pictures and attaching a strong emotional component to it was a way that they not only learned, but really retained the material. I took my cues from the TV program, You Are There by Walter Cronkite, which many of us
Oh, wow.
remember.
Yeah.
I think it was in the 60s, because he placed us, the viewer, in the historical context of the situation. And that's what I did when I taught. I taught Jewish history, I taught Bible as history. And so I would place us in those situations. And it was always in the first person plural. What are we going to do? We are surrounded by, we have this conflict. What are we going to do? And so we were there in those historic situations. And I found that that really connected with the kids, that they really not just latched on, but they retained the material. And I also, with, you could say, bringing in the ed psych background, the format of my classroom was very different. It wasn't the traditional rows and desk in the front, in the middle. I moved the desk aside. I had two concentric semicircles where students can actually face each other when they spoke. So they weren't talking to each other's backs. And there was much more interaction. And I stood all the time. I stood in the middle of the concentric semicircles. And I taught not by lecturing, I taught by role playing, by telling stories, by acting things out, so that I was helping us to get into that framework where we were actually there in those situations. And we, of course, would have discussions and all that other stuff. And then I would have the students do presentations on the material. And they would do it in ways that really tapped their creativity. So we would always have, we would have videos of their presentations, newspapers that they would create. Some of the kids did songs. They made up songs. They did cartoons. They did, I remember, some ballet dance presentations.
Oh, wow.
That they did. Just incredible. So they not only entertained one another, but they taught one another. And in the process, they learned. And that was the bottom line. It wasn't just fun, it was learning, and they really retained the material. And so that's what I did for 34 years. It was wonderful. I loved it. I formed some wonderful, long-lasting relationships, friendships with my students, which I still have today. And let me just look at my notes to see if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about regarding that. No.
Okay.
So moving on to my second, the other parallel career. This was not the traditional kind where you get paid for. This was Lucy's and my involvement, and our son Danny, in our chavurah. And being a teacher, let me spell it. Havurah, chavurah. And if you want to pronounce it in the Hebrew, chavurah, okay. It means fellowship. And we're a group, a small group that meets in each other's living rooms for Jewish cultural, religious, and social purposes 2 to 3 times a month. And I'll give you a bit of the background. Back in 1970, when we were all a bit younger, there was this group of 6 couples in the far Northeast who really wanted to do their own Jewish thing. They left their synagogues because they were too institutionalized. And they wanted to make Judaism more personal, more intimate. And so they would have these discussions, and they would go home, and they were so enthralled by these meetings with each other that their kids were very precocious, wanted to join them. And so now it went from 6 couples to 6 families, and they didn't know what to do with these kids. They heard of me. I was a young rabbinical student at the time. I heard of them. And when I met with them for the first time, they said, do something with us now that we're families. We don't know what to do with these kids. And they said, we don't want you to be our rabbi, though. And I said, good, because I don't want to be your rabbi. And so I would lead the family activities. And then when the kids would go off, the adults would sit and discuss on their own. And there were natural leaders in the group. There were 25 people in the group at the time. And over time, I assumed the leadership. I became the facilitator, never the rabbi, but the facilitator by virtue of my background. And we the kids grew up and out of the group. And so fast forward to today, we are going on our 52nd year together.
Oh my God.
And we still meet in each other's homes, but during COVID, we all meet via Zoom. So 52, almost 52 years, and we're still together and very active. And in fact, some of us are meeting even more often than 2-3 times a month. And I am still the facilitator. If somebody wants to do, say, a presentation, a project on shtetl life in Eastern Europe, that person takes charge, researches it, presents it. If somebody in the group wants to do a creative Shabbat morning, Sabbath morning service, that person does it, okay? So I facilitate. And let me see where I am with that. And you can see that I fully utilized my background, both in the Jewish content and the ed psych. Now, the third parallel career has been something that some of the members of NVN are aware of, because some members are very active in our neighborhood association, Gresham Village Neighbors. We've been together and very active for 34 years. We started as a town watch back in 1988. There were a couple break-ins in the neighborhood. And so a group of us would patrol. And that got old fairly quickly because thankfully we didn't have enough crime to sustain us. And also because it was the same people patrolling, regardless of the different formations. And I had pushed for us to really get to know each other more through interacting in different ways. Because my motto has always been, the more we know each other, the more we tend to care for one another. And so we have developed over the years into a very vibrant neighborhood association. We have our monthly meetings with speakers, with topics of all kinds. We have a monthly newsletter. We have a very active listserv, an extensive address list. We even have a very, we have, how would I put it? It's unusual because we have privately contracted to have our streets plowed because the city rarely comes through our narrow streets. We're made up of the very narrow streets of the unit and 100 blocks of Nippon. For those of you who are familiar with these tiny, tiny streets, the unit and 100 blocks of Mount Airy, the unit and 100 blocks of Durham. So these 3 parallel streets, and the cross streets of Bryan and Gresham from Mount Pleasant to Allen's Lane. And so we have that. We have social activities. We're involved in the neighborhood Houston Elementary School, in the business corridor. I've invited lots of new restaurants to come and speak with us and bring some of their food samples with them.
Nice.
And also, we're very involved. We've done community policing with the 14th district. So we are very embedded in the community, and we are a real Cheers. We're not a virtual Cheers. People know each other's names. And let me see if there's anything else that I missed. But I think that's pretty much it. I mean, that's an overview. And why I say 3 parallel careers is because the Chavurah, which again is almost 52 years, has taken a lot of my time and effort. Our Gresham Village Neighbors has taken even more time of all these 34 years. And so they're not avocations at all. I have avocations. And when I retired, I promised myself that I would do reading, writing, and traveling much more than I had. And I've been. I'm finishing up a novel that I've been working on since retirement.
Wow.
So, and people say, so do you sleep? I say, yes, I sleep. You'll see emails going out at 3 a.m. So I'm a late night, late to rise person. But I am very aware of managing my time. Okay, so I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So Susan, you want to ask me questions? And by the way, while Susan's repositioning herself here, I do want to say that those of us who have been extremely fortunate to have been interviewed by Susan, we are blessed with a magnificent interviewer. You would ask me questions. I mean, this is long before we met. We were on the phone for an hour with our initial get together, and you asked me questions that were probing without being personal, without being private. You asked me questions that were thought-provoking and that were just so fantastic. And the time and effort that you put into this could be one of your vocations. So I just want to thank Susan, and I hope that others have the opportunity that those of us have had.
Well, thank you. I didn't know I was going to have this appreciative comment. Thank you very much, Steve. Steve, I've enjoyed hearing you talk both on this occasion and on others when we've chatted. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up that I found that impacted me was a statement that you made, something to the effect that you brought a broad perspective to neighborhood groups. And I think much of what you've said about the groups that you were so intensively involved in certainly lends credence to that statement. I guess I'd just like you to comment on that broad perspective that you're bringing to neighborhood groups.
Well, with our neighborhood association, with Gresham Village Neighbors, with my Chavara, with my teaching, and with groups that I was involved with even before, for me, what has worked for me has been the personal element, to try to connect with each person. And as the coordinator of our neighborhood association, I really try to connect with all of our neighbors, not each person door to door, but those who I interact with, I try to get to know as people. That's why one of the things that I love doing as the coordinator of Gresham Village Neighbors is to greet new neighbors with a gift card to High Point. And so I come into their home and I basically interview them. I get to know them. Okay, so it forms a connection. And that to me has always been important. And that is the importance of relationships. That is paramount for me. So even though I have to take, not have to, but I take a broad view of us as a neighborhood. We have over 300 households. How do we interact with each other where we respect each other and treat each other with dignity and with respect? That is primary. I don't have tolerance for anything but that. That's how I attempt to treat people, and that's how I expect people to treat each other. And we have a listserv, very fortunately, where we do treat each other with respect. I've heard of so many listservs, so many social media where people they clobber one another. That is not tolerated. It's not tolerated by anyone in our neighborhood. So we stick up for each other, both personally and as a community. And that has worked in our Havurah. My doctoral dissertation, as Elliot knows, was on my Havurah, the group function of a Havurah. And I could boil it down to one word in our 52 years, and that is acceptance. We accept each other for all of our shticks, for all of our idiosyncrasies. And oh my God, have we had idiosyncrasies as individuals. But we are accepting. And that to me is the cornerstone of human relationships. You know, it's a simple thing.
Well, there's a lot there for us as NVN to chew on as well. Us as a neighborhood group and how we enrich each other's lives.
Yeah, most definitely. I love NVN, and it has been just a source of joy for Lucy and me over these years. And while I would love to be more involved, I have to hold myself back because I'm like a kid in a candy store. I want to try everything, but then I would lose my perspective on what I'm doing. So there are very, very capable people taking care of NVN.
Wanted to raise a comment that you made and that you haven't touched on yet in your talk, and that is, you were saying in one of our talks we had that for you, first and foremost is family. Would you like to expand on that?
Well, I think it's important for me and maybe others to prioritize what I do daily, what I do with my life. My family has always been number one for me. And everything else, it doesn't take a back seat, but my family first. And my foundations have to be solid in order to build on them. And my family is my foundation. That's it. So Lucy and Danny, we have a small family. We are a small family. We don't have much extended family. And so our Havurah has been our extended family for 52 years.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much it.
And what has worked for you in retirement, Steve?
What has worked? Going to bed when I want and getting up when I want. For 34 years teaching at Akiba, I had to be up at 6 a.m. I hated it. I hated getting up at that time. Once I was up, I was fine. But my body clock doesn't work that way. And so what has worked is I can do that. Okay, so that has worked. And also being my own boss. I think many of us find that in retirement, we listen to ourselves. Now, listening to ourselves means I listen to all the voices around me, you know, to the needs of my family, to the needs of my Havurah, needs of my neighborhood association, to other people's needs. So in what has worked for me in retirement is that I could really work those in. I don't have to look at the clock. In retirement, I found something that I never did when I worked at Akiba. I can go out for lunch in the middle of the day.
How about that?
I never did that before. I used to look outside the window of my classrooms and see people walking outside and used to wonder, how did they ever get out there? So now I can do that. And I've taken full advantage of it. I get together with friends a lot for lunch, for dinner. We do things in the afternoon together. It's nice. It's freeing. And I consider myself extremely fortunate that I, among our friends, our colleagues, we are one of the very fortunate few on this planet who can do that with our lives, where we have the time and we have the financial stability to do those things.
Mhm.
I don't forget that.
Yeah. it's
And
true.
I don't take it for granted. Never.
Well, and now we will give you all a chance to interact with Steve. And let's see, I'm going to do gallery view. We're going to do unmute.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, no. Cancel. How do I unmute?
People have to unmute themselves,
Oh,
okay? And we could get rid of that little square there. Okay.
please unmute yourselves. And if you have any questions, this is our Q&A time. You must have addressed all of their thoughts.
Well, Barbara has a question there.
Barbara,
You have to unmute yourself, Barbara.
have to unmute, please. Bob? Can you unmute? Yes.
There we go. Well, it occurs to me that Steve is so accomplished, I don't even know where to begin to ask how he did all that. Where did you find the energy for that? I know Lucy was part of it because she's energizing. She's been a wonderful partner, I believe. I just, it's not really a question, but I admire anyone who sorts their time out to accomplish so much.
Well, this sounds rather trite, but I'm passionate about what I do. And I love interacting with the people who I interact with. I love forming and sustaining relationships. And that to me is important. And very fortunately, Lucy and I are high energy people.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Elliot, is that a question?
No, it was off. Elliot had just left because our daughter called to wish him a happy birthday. And
Oh,
so he's now back from getting her happy birthday wishes.
Elliot, I hope you caught the kudos to you as my former dissertation advisor.
Right. Did you tell them what your dissertation was about?
I did in passing. I'll mention it again for those who didn't hear it. I did it on my chavurah. It was the group development of a chavurah, this fellowship, this small group that we've been part of. Of course, in the early 70s, it was going through a very formative process of establishing the natural leaders in the group and so forth and so forth. And Elliot was my dissertation. You were one of the 3 dissertation advisors I had. Yes. And it was great because Elliot and Ellie were also in a chavurah, a different one.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which we
So
too are also
relevant.
we too are also still in that chavurah, not quite 52 years, but close to that.
Yeah.
oh my.
Yeah.
What a
But it's
wonderful.
not as exciting as yours, Steve. You do a lot more, I'm sure, and give you kudos for all that. As you were talking, there was such a sense of all the things that you do and that you facilitate. It's wonderful.
Well,
Thanks.
ours is kind of tailed off. We
Yeah,
did do a
yeah,
lot.
Yeah.
Is it sort of like a neighborly group?
Well, I
It's
have envisioned a neighborly group. I'd have to know more about a neighborly group. As I said before, we get together for Jewish cultural, religious, and social purposes. And in the course of all of our years, now we're not the same number of people who were in the group from the very beginning. People have come, they've gone, people have died. As I said, we've gone from a group of about 25 that included the kids to today, where we're an active group of about 10 of us. So I don't know if that is similar to a neighborly group or not knowing what a neighborly group really does. But over the years, you really get to know each other, and meeting 3 times a month. Some of us 4 times a month.
That's a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Steve, I think if let me just also think about this, the idea of neighborly, I think this simply means the idea that the original group, as you stated, lived in the same neighborhood.
Well, we are not. We, as I mentioned when I described the Havurah, there were basically, it started in the far northeast with these 6 families. But over the years, we've had people, members of the group from Southampton, from Center City, Cherry Hill,
Wow.
from Rydal. Lucy and I and Danny were the only ones from Mount Airy. Okay,
Right.
and that has taken an extra commitment, because we travel to each other's homes, and we don't live around the corner from one another. And I have to say that the average age today, Lucy and I being the youngest in the group, average age is in the early 80s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Our Havurah began more with a proximity, people in the neighborhood, relatively speaking. I mean, not within walking distance, but relatively close. But as we've increased over time, people have moved. So it's a broader geographic area than it used to be.
Yeah.
Hope has a question.
Steve, if you were scattered around the city, how did people get to know what was going on? What was the way that people were brought together, and how do people come into it now?
Oh, good question. Primarily word of mouth. People know each other. For instance, people whose children were in the Boy Scouts together, and they would talk to one another, or they'd have various cultural groups that they belong to in Center City or elsewhere. And there have been articles about us. The first article actually appeared in the New York Times in 1971, because we were one of the first of our kind, and it talked about this group. The word Havurah was not used at that time on a broad basis. And in fact, these kinds of groups started in the Catholic Church in the 60s, and it started to spread to Jewish communities. How people learned about us, there were articles about us in the Jewish Exponent over the years, for our 24th anniversary, our 36th anniversary, for our 50th anniversary. And so people would read about us, and they would be interested. They come and try us out and see how much of a fit it was or wasn't.
Lucy, do you have something to say?
I just want to clarify neighborly group versus a Havurah. In our case, a Havurah focuses on practicing Jewish things. In other words, a particular thrust. We don't have services per se every week. We may have a Saturday morning service, but we celebrate Jewish holidays and Jewish events, and we study or read about different things that all relate in some way to our Jewishness or Jewish background. And I think that separates us from a neighborly group, because I think a neighborly group is more of a group of people who gather together it's a social thing, and they may do activities and what have you, but there's not this sort of adjunct to a synagogue kind of thing about a Havurah. Is that right, Steve? Am I doing a good job at explaining that? Because he'll tell me later. He'll say, "No, you didn't say." I mean,
It was perfectly.
and the other thing is, I like Steve mentioned, it's the idea of a group like this started in the Catholic Church, but from what I understand, many other congregational groups, Christian, and I don't know about any other, but like Muslim or whatever, but Christian had groups that would even form within their own congregations, or and that may be an adjunct to or part of the larger organization.
Sure.
And they would, meet in maybe a separate room in the building. So, it's not just the Jewish thing, but in this case, we met in each other's homes. But so I think, tell me if I'm wrong, Steve, there are Havarot who are parts of various synagogues.
Yes.
They may not call themselves that, but that type of thing. They may be just doing prayer on Saturday morning.
Yes, we've been independent for all these years. Now, we have members in the group that are members of synagogues, and we have members in the group who are not. So it does serve, what it serves the purposes of is to, again, as I mentioned earlier, bring people together on a more personal, intimate basis to that synagogues don't. One of the members of our group puts it very succinctly when he says, synagogues, the synagogue is a monologue, the Havurah is a dialogue. So that really sums it up.
Very good.
It sounds a little bit like the same sort of thing that appeals to people who join Workman's Circle.
Yes, I'm sure it's similar. I'm sure.
Workman's Circle?
That was a more of a Yiddish secular kind of group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I belong to the Unitarian Society in Germantown, and they have something they call small group ministry. And they meet monthly around a theme to talk, to bring an intimate scale to our social life together, or religious life together. Yes, Bob.
Steve, you obviously spent years working with young people. And I'm wondering if you see how things have changed. I mean, I know we're in a time in society where religion is playing a less active part in many people's lives. Can you talk about how you've seen the young people change through the years? And are these Havurahs something that is going to or does interest them? And is it a way of maybe helping people stay within a religious context where going to church or to temple or whatever would not?
I have always felt that Havurah is either an adjunct or in place of a synagogue where people want to connect with others in a more direct, personal way. And has it increased over the years? That I wish I could tell you, Bob. I'm not in touch with the you could say the Havurah movement as such, but I would think that as young people in their 20s and 30s are reaching out to form groups that they could belong to, that this concept would appeal to them. The only thing is that as people get into their 20s and 30s and have other responsibilities, a group like this does take a lot of time and commitment. And that's why belonging to a synagogue is I wouldn't say an easy out, but it's much less of a commitment. Whereas in a Havurah, you do have to commit to the time and the effort to be there at least. And since it's a self-directed group, you are expected to participate at least. So I don't know if that answers your question, but over the years, do I see young people gravitating more toward this kind of group? Yes, in general. In general, I have seen that. With teenagers, they're too busy trying to control their hormones to be to be concerned with anything else. That's not within their purview as teenagers. But as people in their 20s, in their 30s, more in their 40s, when they have families, young families, and they start to decide what they want to do as young families, this can be more appealing.
Thank you.
Folks, if there's any further urgent questions, let's have them. I think we're just about to wrap up. Okay, I just want to remind you that
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Steve. I thought it was really interesting and your presentation was great. I enjoyed it a lot.
Really, the check is in the mail.
and we see a comment in chat from Ann Lee saying, thank you, Steve, with many exclamation points.
And thank you, Susan, for doing this. It's
Yes,
really been
yes.
an interesting way for us to be, in some senses, more formally aware of one another. And that's great. I hope you continue it in the fall.
Sarah, would you be able to send the
Yeah.
There she is. Would you be able to, we can't make it down on Wednesday. I haven't been able to come, but I'd love to see your work.
Okay.
How do I find it?
Well, some of it is on the Da Vinci Art Alliance. I'll send you a.
I would love it. I'd love it if you could
Okay.
do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to know, Sarah, because I'm not going to make it to the show either, and I really would like to see it. So maybe
Okay.
put it on the bulletin board.
Yes, please do.
We have that up.
There are a couple of videos. If I can figure out how to get them on the bulletin board, I will. I have trouble putting them on my Instagram, but I'll try. Yeah.
But at least give us the link on the bulletin board.
Okay, I can do that. Yeah.
Thank
No,
you.
they've been wonderful. They've made 3 or 4 different videos to different music as part of their advertising. So it's kind of fun. They do a video tour of the exhibition. So yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we want to see that.
Good.
Please join us on June 6th.
Right.
We have lost Bob and Barbara Harris, but to accommodate for Barbara's medical needs and the sometimes erratic nature of when she can be present or not present, I videoed an interview with her, and we will broadcast the interview on June 6th. If she can, and we will gather on Zoom, and then I will share screen and broadcast the interview. Then we'll come back to our Zoom meeting. And if Barbara can be there, she will be there to address your questions. If not, we will have seen her presentation. So that's June 6th, that's 7 o'clock. I hope you can make it.